Welcome to Smith Weekly Discussions, an occasional program for our readers and listeners of Smith Weekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine the show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience of Smith Weekly, including Luke A. and Mike P. Returning to the show is Scott Hicks, Vice President Corporate Development of Luminex Resources, an Ecuador-focused gold copper explorer and developer advancing the flagship Condor project in Ecuador. The company has a group of Ecuador exploration projects being evaluated through joint ventures. The company is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol LR, and also on the US OTC markets under the symbol LUMIF. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for having me again.
Well, Scott, to the markets first. Thoughts on gold and also on copper at this point?
I'll start with the negative one and finish with the positive one. I mean, obviously, we've seen copper basically test, call it upper end of the cost curve here recently. So, I mean, getting down to that kind of just over $2 level. I mean, obviously, we don't think that's sustainable and it's just a near-term blip, so to speak. I think a lot of the demand is going to come right back as soon as all this coronavirus stuff is cleared up. It's not like oil where you and I aren't getting in our car today and not driving and not burning a barrel of oil and that demand's gone. I think that demand for the copper is still going to be there and come right back once that's cleared up. On the gold side, I mean, this is kind of the setup of all setups. I mean, this is what people have been talking about for basically since it went down in 2013 is endless money printing, helicopter money, checks coming directly to people, and true, devaluation of fiat currencies. And I mean, it's crazy to think that all that stuff has kind of come to fruition, but that's where we are now. And I mean, the US dollar has been incredibly strong, and even in the face of that, gold's sitting here, I think, as I'm speaking, at about $1,620 an ounce. So, I mean, if we see, any weakness in the US dollar, when people kind of realize the scale of what the Fed's doing and have somewhere else to go, because I mean, obviously, it's a bit of a flight to safety in the US dollar side of things right now. You got to think gold's going to come close to retesting the highs from 2011.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And short of a liquidity crunch, which still might happen to some degree, like we saw a few weeks ago, there's no doubt that gold is headed higher. Maybe it doesn't happen for 6 months, but certainly it is headed higher, no doubt. We can see the stresses that are in the market on that front, and with a number of operations being curtailed just by government order, that's going to cause continued supply chain issues for gold, which obviously is good for those who have gold. The copper side, certainly we've seen a lot of volatility in copper producers, certainly some challenges going on there. On that topic, speaking of COVID-19, Scott, what are your thoughts? Do you see at this point, I know you guys have been watching, I know you guys have been talking internally. At this point, do you see that this lasts a few more months, or do you see that the impacts will really span the rest of this year and potentially into 2021?
Yeah, so I mean, Ecuador specifically has had a fair number of cases and was, I'd say, pretty early to lock down the international flight situation. I think globally this is going to go on for a while, and obviously the worst thing could happen would be to open it up too fast, and obviously we don't want to see a second kind of wave, so to speak, come through. We're fortunate in both our Ecuadorian companies, Luminex, which we're talking about today, and Lumina, that a lot or most of the field work we've been planning had been done, and really at a point where now we were actually moving to some of the kind of the more engineering, met testing, study, resource estimation phases for those projects. So that just happened to work out timing wise for us. But I mean, in Luminex, and we'll talk about it more, I mean, we're hoping that we could we'd originally talked about a month stop with our two drilling contractors. I mean, we were hoping that at the end of that month, we'd be back at it. Now that's, we're kind of call it 2 weeks into that right now. I think the reality is, if you look at what's happened in Peru and now today, basically in Mexico, this is going to get pushed out, and it's going to be kind of a week here, a week there. I think realistically, if we were back drilling in June, we'd be pretty happy about that scenario. We put out our maiden resource here to give people a progress update on the camp zone, which we've been drilling in Luminex. And that's kind of a point where we can pause naturally and evaluate a lot of the data we have and think about what the best drill targets are to hit next and prioritize.
So we've seen exploration and mining activities halted in some areas due to COVID-19. For operations that are not being stopped by the government, Scott, and for companies who have a prevention and on-site measures in place to prevent, detect, and stop COVID-19 within those operations, do you see that these operations should continue to do their work?
It's really site by site, and it's hard to talk in broad terms, but what I would say is, for people who have remote camps and have, people coming in for longer shifts, I think it's easier to do. You obviously have a lot tighter control of who's going in, who's going out, and the ability to kind of monitor that a bit better. For mines that are having their employees bus in every day, it's probably a bit harder of a proposition. And I guess for other people, it's also to the extent they can social distance and keep that level of safety high. So at our Condor camp, we're down to about 30 people right now, which is kind of, call it the minimum level of staff, and monitoring people on the way in and the way out, and ensure everyone's observing the social distancing rules. And there's still lots of work that people can do in those conditions. So work is ongoing. It's just the drilling we stopped just as a precaution, just because you've got a lot of consumables and outside contractors coming in and out under those circumstances.
I think there is a way to manage and mitigate, even though a lot of people out there are saying that everything should be stopped. And I don't think that's the prudent way of going about it. I think that there are ways to mitigate it, not just in the mining industry, but even in the utility business and the critical support activities for utilities. I'm involved with other consulting with other companies that have critical infrastructure mandates to make sure that support activities for utilities continue for power generation purposes and so forth. And I think that we've seen a lot of protocols come out, even in-house, that are very good and really can be just as good as these government orders to stay in your house and these types of things. I think that people who are putting their mind to it can come up with policies, temporary policies that make sense while we go through this process. Scott, let's talk a little bit more about Ecuador for a moment. How's Ecuador doing generally in comparison to, say, maybe a Peru, a Chile, a Panama? How are things going there? Is the government holding up okay during this COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing in the last month that would really affect Ecuador has been the shift in oil prices. It's obviously a big portion of their economy. And having these dramatic downdrafts, it was a big deal for them, obviously. And when we went from $100 a barrel to $50 a barrel, and going from 50 to 20 odd dollars is dramatic, and will put a big hole in their budget. Medium to long term, I think that continues to strengthen the argument for diversifying the economy, and is probably a net benefit to mining. But in the near term, that it's not helping anybody. So that's probably the biggest impact from the COVID-19 stuff that's directly hurting Ecuador. The next elections are basically a year from now. Obviously, we saw, last November, October timeline, the government trying to remedy the deficit by reducing the fuel subsidy and doing some things like that, which caused a bit of civil unrest, and they ultimately had to put that back in. So, I think for the government, it's a question of how can we cut costs and how can we raise revenue in other areas. So that's really, I think, been their focus. and that'll take time. I mean, obviously, you and I know that mining projects don't turn on overnight, and they've fortunately had these two large-scale mines come online here in Q4 with Mirador and Fruta del Norte, and they were just starting to really start kicking out some real dollars back to the government on taxes and royalties, and obviously during the construction they've been supporting the surrounding communities for the whole build time, because there's very substantial investment there. So the COVID thing and having those mines either paused or back to reduced activity is also tough. But I think once we get on the other side of this, hopefully on the other side of Q2, those two mines and other mines are gonna prove crucial for the government on the revenue and the deficit side.
Yeah, the mine revenues are just important for these countries. I mean, I saw also Calibre Mining shut down their operations in Nicaragua, and I know that those operations, formerly held by B2, as you know, are substantial tax revenue for the countries. So this is going to hurt, and it's going to be painful for a while. And the governments, I suspect, want to do everything they could potentially do to get these things up and running as quick as possible once things start to pass on here. Well, it's been about a year since we talked about Luminex. What has been accomplished since we spoke, and what changes have occurred over at the company?
We've achieved a lot in that year, and I can't remember the exact date we talked last, but the big items were obviously the discovery of the camp zone, which would have been around this time last year. And for your viewers, that's the area that was right underneath our camp at Condor, and had never been drilled before. Where we had an initial hole of about 40 meters of intercept for almost 5 gram per ton material. So by far and away the best material that had been found to date at the project. So that discovery, and then obviously we also did the partnership with BHP on our Tarqui project, and that's probably our most prospective early stage copper project there. So those are really the two large developments. And then in the background, obviously, we've had Anglo-American working away on our Pegasus projects for now another full year. And they're at the point where they were planning to drill before the end of the year and start that program after a pretty rigorous geophysics program and a lot of soil stream sampling, very methodical exploration techniques. So those are the three main components of the company: the Condor project that we're funding and drilling, the BHP project that they're planning to fund and drill, Tarqui there, and then Anglo working away on our largest land package, Pegasus, the 67,000 hectares just in the center of the country.
And where are we today as far as capital structure, cash on hand, potential cash coming in on the joint venture front, and of course, percentage ownership by the major backers?
So just capital structure, we're sitting at about 72 million shares outstanding. I think we're trading at 66 cents a share today. So, under a $50 million Canadian market cap, which is, by my view, kind of breathtaking. If you think about the suite of assets we have that have resources, as well as the partners we have deploying their capital. We raised 10 million Canadian in December, and we have about 8.4 million US on the balance sheet as of the end of December, and we're just about to file those financials next week. Shareholder-wise, we've got Ross Beatty, who took 3 million of the 10 million financing in December to max himself out at that 19.9% level, so just under the control person threshold. We have an Ecuadorian group that holds 9%, Route One, that's a fund out of San Francisco that holds about 9%, and then management and the board, which hold another 7%. So between Ross and management, it's about 27% of the company that's held. And we typically go pro rata every financing. And then your other question regarding money coming in from BHP and Anglo. Anglo is actually getting close to the first phase of the earn-in, where they would get to the 27%, 25% ownership threshold. And they needed to spend $10 million US in the ground to get to that, and pay us about $3.2 million in cash payments. So they need to pay us another just under $1 million in cash payments to get to that 25% threshold, and they're getting pretty close on their spend at that 10 million rate. BHP, they just had started out more recently, so they're not close to an initial threshold there, but they're working on the community and working on the geophysics and getting the project to be drill ready.
And that $1 million that will come in at some point from Anglo, can you speak to, will that happen sometime in 2020, Scott, or when do you see that potentially? Where's a window on that?
I think they had until actually 2021 to pay that and to hit their exploration spend, but they have been spending at a faster rate than they need to be on the exploration side. So they'll probably, I imagine, I don't know this, but I imagine once they hit the spend threshold, they'll probably just make the cash payment to get that ownership threshold locked in. But like I said, I don't know that. So, they have more time if they want to. But that, that is money that will come in the next year and a bit here.
Yeah, that sounds good. And with your guys' current cash balance, Scott, are you guys of the opinion that you guys will be pretty well off for the remainder of the year with your activities and where you guys have your cash balance?
Yeah, so we had planned out to, fund for about 9 months, call it, with the drilling activity, and we've been drilling fairly rigorously with 3 rigs until the end of last year, and then 2 rigs since January. And given the COVID stuff we were talking about, we've just paused that. So, it'll be a bit up in the air when the funds get us to, but I'd imagine, Q3, Q4, once we restart drilling. Our group's always had a philosophy that if you're on to something, it's better to drill faster than slower and go raise the capital you need. So that was certainly, our theory when we raised the 10 million in December to keep drilling the camp zone. And, this maiden resource we put out shows that, we are adding value at the drill bit.
I want to go back for just a moment. First Quantum, what was the thought process behind them pulling out? Was it because of their financial situation, Scott? And in addition to that, can you speak to, are you guys in communication with further parties to attract further joint venture work on the company concessions? And will those deals, if they come about, will they be similar in structure to what's happened with BHP and Anglo?
So I'll start with First Quantum. So going back, we had a similar deal to what we have with BHP and Anglo with First Quantum on our Orchidius and Cascas properties. They had drilled with us about 5 holes on Orchidius, which was a copper molybdenum target. The drilling didn't return great results, as well as it kind of closed off the potential size that it could be, the deposit. So that for them, I think, was a point where they wanted to walk out. It was also their only project in Ecuador. So, if you think about their approach, they were interested in one project, they had us operate it, and they just wanted to see how that went. Whereas BHP and Anglo have built, huge teams in Ecuador. They're setting up for the long term. We're not operating those projects, they're operating them, and they're being pretty methodical about it. Anglo has been so far, having been at it for over a year and a half now. Back to First Quantum, I think, they had a lot going on in their company, obviously, and a new jurisdiction on an early stage project that had, so-so drill results after 5 holes. I think for them, that was just a let's pause here point. Coming back to the other properties and the question on whether we'd look at other partnerships, yeah, I mean, we still have a fair number of early stage greenfield ones. If your listeners are looking at our presentation on slide 6, you can see there's the map of the whole country, and we've obviously got our key projects, Condor, Tarky, and Pegasus, but there's a lot of blue boxes there as well that are early stage projects that could be partnered. We certainly have CAs with people and have had people looking at these. We would be open to partnering them, with the exception of Cascas, I should say, because Cascas is really, in our mind, the next best gold target outside of Condor. But La Canela, Tres Picachos, Arcadius, Kimi, those are the remaining properties, and we'd look at partnering those if people were interested. And some of those or most of those are copper targets. So we've taken the philosophy of focusing on drilling the gold targets and letting the number of copper players that have entered the country focus on the copper stuff.
Yes, and certainly First Quantum, they've got their hands full with Cobre de Panama, so that'll probably keep them busy for a while. And obviously, the current conditions in the market is not helping them. Now, let's talk a little bit more about recent news, Camp Zone news that just came out. And then can you also just include with that your guys' plans to finish out 2020? Just give us an update on what you guys plan to accomplish the rest of the year.
Sure. So just for your listeners' benefit, the Condor project, it's a series of deposits. It's not one deposit. And if you think about the property, you can really divide it into two halves. There's the northern portion, which is an epithermal gold system, and then there's the southern portion where we have a large gold copper porphyry. So in the northern area, that's where the camp deposit is. That's really where we've focused our drilling. So right now, existing deposits before we found the camp zone at Cuyas and Soledad, there was about 1.6, 1.7 million ounces of, call it, 0.7 material there in open pittable format. So, reasonable grade and low strip deposits that are sitting there. But we wanted to look for a higher grade starter area. So that's why we were very excited when we found the camp deposit. Now we've just put out the maiden resource that was based on our first 28 holes of drilling there. So we defined about 12 million tons of material at 2.25 grams per ton gold, and call it 3 grams per ton gold equivalent. There's a fair amount of silver in the mix with this as well. So the deposit, is 900,000 ounces of gold, 7.4 million ounces of silver there. So, a great starting point. A lot of companies would be happy to have that as a million ounce gold deposit as a standalone underground scenario. So we have that there now, and really what that will potentially allow us to do when we go to do a PEA study is have that higher grade material on the front end of a mine life, and then you've got those other deposits, within a kilometer radius. Cuyas is 400 meters away, Soledad's about a kilometer, and you can bring those in on the back end of the mine life. So, you've got a fairly large gold project just in the epithermal area there now, with almost 3 million ounces basically. And then, as far as what we're trying to do next, there's a untested space between some of these deposits. So, it looks like the camp deposit trends from the north west to the southeast. And if you keep going to the southeast, you basically hit our Soledad deposit. So we want to test the area that's in the middle right now, and that's called, we're calling that Soledad Bajo. That's the area where we'll drill test next. And we think we can do some shallow drilling there to see if the two areas connect. And that would add quite a bit of scale to the project if that were to happen. We also have, we've been hitting really good, very high grade results, in the 6 to 7 gram per ton type area deep in the camp zone. So we could drill additional deep holes there and look to add more high grade underground material at the camp deposit. And then, to the northwest of the camp zone, some of the soil work we've been doing looks very prospective there as well. So we could continue, to the northwest trend. So these are the kind of the three areas we'll be working to explore in and around the existing deposits. And then the last area that I know it's a lot of things to list because there's a lot of different targets at this property. But the last area we're looking at is called Prometedor, and that's just to the south of the Soledad pit, and that's quite a large surface gold anomaly there. So when you think about this, there's so much mineralization on this property, and for us it's just been we knew the exploration potential was there. It's how do you get enough high grade material to wrap a project around it, and we think with the camp zone, and we've done that now. And then we're excited to keep drilling these other targets and really see how big this thing can get now.
So the Condor is obviously going to be the main focus, and your guys' other wholly owned concessions, is there any plans to do any further work this year out there?
Yeah, so we're getting Cascas prepped for drilling, and really, Diego and the team in country have done a phenomenal job of working with the communities over the last, call it year and a half to get the access agreements, the work agreements in place with the community so that we can go do more work there and look to drill it. Cascas 2, which is they're contiguous concessions, but Cascas 2 is the one to the further south. Historically has had a lot of artisanal mining on it, so we know there's a substantial amount of gold there. We already have a pretty well-defined gold anomaly and a pretty well-defined copper anomaly on that property. So, the plan originally pre-COVID was to get drilling that in this year. We'll see if that happens this year or early next, but that is kind of our next best gold target outside of Condor. So, you could see a scenario where we keep 2 rigs going at Condor and maybe add a third down at Cascas for some kind of scout drilling.
And Scott, what's your guys' timeline as far as, getting I believe it's an updated PEA on Condor and moving forward down that advancement path? What's your guys' 2-year plan on that front?
It's a bit of an odd project in the sense that when we acquired it, the prior company had done a PEA, but they'd only done it on Santa Barbara, which is that porphyry in the south. And they hadn't looked at the northern deposits. So we're probably going to do the opposite and leave Santa Barbara for now and really focus on what a PEA would look like in this northern area. It will be, everything's kind of fresh from that perspective. We've just started a metallurgy round on all the fresh material from the camp deposits, so that'll give us a good sense on the gold, silver recoveries there, as well as some of the base metals you find in the deposit, and really kind of be a good stepping stone to doing a PEA. I think it would be realistic to have a PEA out and call it mid 2021. We don't want to rush it necessarily because some of those areas I was just talking about drilling between, say, the camp and Soledad or to the northwest of the camp could materially change the type of project you're looking at up there for scale, quantity bounces, throughput, etc. So we're driving everything forward as much as we can while still waiting to see the drill results, because it is changing fairly fast. We've put up 1 million ounces here at the camp deposit in relatively short order, and so that kind of shows you that another, say, 6 months of drilling could change a lot again as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. And interesting to see what else you guys can delineate out there. And it's certainly coming together and a pretty dang good setup with what you guys have going with the JV projects and some of these other wholly owned targets. Lots of good things going on, and we're excited to continue to watch what you guys are doing.
The last thing I'd say, Andrew, is, and Ross likes to make this point, and I think it's a good one, is, we think that Condor alone supports the valuation of the company. I understand why people have trouble attributing specific value to, say, the Anglo or the BHP deals, because there isn't a resource there yet, and they haven't started drilling. But on the Anglo properties, they've defined 8 different porphyry targets already, and BHP took our best copper property that we had already defined a target on. So I think the odds that one of the 2 of them hit or both of them hit are reasonable. And if that happens, there's a lot of potential for the share price, given that Condor is already providing that base valuation to where we are today.
Yes, absolutely. I agree 100%. Scott, how about potential investors who are listening or even existing shareholders? Why should they be taking a new stake or an additional stake in Luminex today? What would you say to them at this point?
I think we're in a unique time in the market where, this stock and company is not appreciated. I would have said that pre-COVID, and I think COVID's only exacerbated it because people are looking for positions with liquidity. And, I'd say to your listeners that pick some valuation levels in these liquid names and, take advantage of some of these drops you're seeing. I mean, I'll use another example that is not us, just so people don't think I'm just talking about Luminex, but I mean, say, look at a name like Midas Gold in the States. I mean, we saw that drop from 50 to 25 cents, just valuations that don't make any sense. So, I mean, pick some levels, set some limit orders, and, pick the names you want to hold for a while. And I think this is probably one of the most exciting exploration packages in Ecuador, which is, a rapidly evolving mining jurisdiction. And so I think you've got upside to the country's development. I think you've got upside to the BHP and Anglo work. And then, we're proving that we're adding ounces at Condor as we drill here. So a lot of upside. And all this, again, is, in a sub $50 million Canadian company. It's pretty unique from that perspective. In fact, I don't think there's any other junior company out there like it right now.
It is a good setup, and that's certainly why we're here, and we continue to support the company. And you guys have a good setup where even if the market conditions continue to deteriorate in the broad market, you've got strong hands and a strong group and a strong backing to where people know that this is going to pass through these rough times and will eventually get realized by the market for what it is. And so I think that's a good point to potential folks who are listening. And Scott, how about investors who want to reach out to the company for more information? Where can they go?
Our website, which is luminexresources.com, and email the info there. Just email myself. I'd encourage people to sign up on the Twitter or LinkedIn for the company. We try to put up any interviews or news there, and keep people posted on what's happening. So definitely reach out if you have any questions. I know there's a lot of moving pieces in this company, and it takes a while for people to understand. But I think when your listeners, look closer at the package and think about the individual components and the values, it's a pretty unique proposition.
Agreed. Well, Scott, once again, thanks for taking the time and good luck out there.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it.